family sayings. I bet a lot of you do too. And I can go clear back to my great-grandfather on my daddy's side, who was a man of very few words, but when he spoke in proverbs. And every year when I was growing up, we would go to Amarillo, Texas. We missed the submarine. And we would spend part of the Christmas holidays at my grandparents' house. And one Christmas we were there, I was probably just preschool age, I would guess, and I was out in the front yard playing with my boy cousins, because they were much nearer my age than my girl cousins, and besides, I was a big old tomboy. Now, my boy cousins had learned how to whistle through their teeth, and they taught me how to whistle through my teeth. And I was so proud of my newly acquired skill that I walked into the front room of my grandparents' house practicing. Now, my great-grandfather, we called him Grandpa, was sitting where he always sat, in an old oak rocker, kind of sideways to what we called the fireplace. It wasn't really a fireplace, it was a mantle that had an open flame stove in it. He was sitting right next to that, but he was facing the front wall of the house. And as I walked through the door, practicing my whistling, Grandpap said, as if he were talking to the wall, but clearly this was meant for me, he said, "A whistling girl and a crowing hen will come to no good end." So I quit whistling in front of him. And a Christmas or two after that, I got as one of my gifts one of those little autograph books. I was going around to all the assembled relatives getting them to sign my book. And when I got to Grandpa, I think he might still have been remembering the whistling episode. And he took my book and he looked at me and he wrote in the book, "Pretty is as pretty does." And he signed it W.W. Davis, just in case I didn't know what his real name was. Now I'm going to skip a generation because the next sayings that I remember came from my parents. My mother would occasionally wax literary when she gave me advice, but she had really good taste. She liked Shakespeare. So one of her favorite sayings comes from the play Hamlet. It's part of that advice that Polonius is given to Laertes before Laertes goes off to France. And one of the things Polonius said was, "To thine own self be true, and then it must follow as the night the day, that thou canst not then be false to any man." Now, other times, my mother's advice to me was more practical and to the point. For example, if I was going on a trip, especially, she would look at me and she would say, "Always wear clean underwear, because you never know when you might be in a wreck." Now, my dad was an old cowboy. He thought he was the last cowboy of the Western world, and so I grew up riding horses. I had a horse before I could even walk, actually, and he would take me up even as an infant. He would take me up in front of him on his saddle, on his horse. Over the years, if I got bucked off of or fell off of one of those horses, which did happen on more than one occasion, my dad had but one bit of advice for me, and it was, "You got to get back up on the horse that throws you." And so I would. Well, then at a certain point, we moved from Brownfield, Texas, where I was born, to Amarillo, where my grandparents lived. And that's when I took to riding bicycles, because even though I still had a horse, I didn't really have ready access to my horse. And I was in 3rd grade before I got my first bicycle, because this was not very many years after World War II, and well, new bicycles were still hard to come by. So I got a hand-me-down from my dad's little sister. And it was blue, my aunt's bicycle was, but I must have still been thinking horses, and I was sort of in my Palomino period, and so I painted it yellow with white stripes. And I must have ridden that bicycle hundreds of miles in my neighborhood. Sometimes motorizing it by clothespinning old playing cards in the so that the faster I pedal, the faster my motor ran. And then it would be, I was in the 7th grade when I got my first brand new bicycle. It was green. And it was a boy's bicycle because I was still a tomboy, but mostly I wanted the horn that was in the bar that went from the seat to the handlebars. And then it would be years and years and years and years and years before I would have another new bicycle. I was already out of college, married, and my husband and I decided that we would get matching Schwinn bicycles. We were sort of in our fitness period. I used mine mostly to go to the grocery store, had a little basket on the front. And then, in 2001, we had an opportunity, my husband and I, to go to Germany for a month. Some friends of ours, native Germans, had invited us to come over. They had grown up in East Germany. So we spent the first 3 weeks with them touring East Germany, places that my husband had never seen, although he'd been in the military and he had been in Germany, but during the time when the wall was up. And it was amazing. And we walked and we walked and we walked, we walked, we walked, we walked, climbed and walked and walked and walked all over that part of Germany. So that by the time we did drive south to Bavaria, we were footsore and weary, sort of in our poop period. And the first night we were in Munich, my husband came up from the hotel lobby holding a brochure advertising bicycle trips, tours of Munich. And we thought, yes, that's what we want to do. No more walking, no more climbing. We're going to ride our bicycles and tour Munich. Well, we went down to the rental place, which was at the train station, and we signed up for a tour. And our guide was a young man from Australia named David. And David took one look at us with our gray hair, and he said, "How long has it been since you rode a bicycle?" And I lied. And I hadn't even started my lying career yet. And I just said the first numbers that came in my head. I said, 5, 10. Later, when that statistic became more relevant to our particular situation, I realized it had probably been more like 15, maybe even 20 years since we had really, really ridden bicycles. I also remember that I learned to ride a bicycle on the flat plains of Texas, where we needed only one speed, and we had those coaster brakes that you could stop the bicycle with just by stepping back on the pedals. Well, here we were, climbing aboard 21-speed bicycles with handbrakes. And David explained to us how the gears work and which brake went to which wheel. And I swear I was listening. But my retention was not good that day. Now we did fine in downtown Munich because it's flat. And they have those dedicated bicycle paths so that if anybody steps into the path, you can just ring the bell on your bicycle and they'll step right out. But then we got what I thought was going to be my favorite part. Out along the Isar River on our way into Englisher Park. But that's where the hills are. So first we went up a hill. And I turned the gears the wrong way, and it got so difficult for me to pedal the bicycle that I had to get off and push it up the hill. Well, David met me at the top of the hill. He was a very tolerant fellow. And he said, well, that's all right. And he reset the gears for me. He said, well, because now we're going to go downhill. And I said, fine. Well, David headed out for it. It was a long hill, and it was a steep hill. David headed out first, and I'm watching to see which way he turns at the bottom of the hill. My husband followed him. I was bringing up the rear. And all this time when I was watching David, I began to realize I was going really too fast. And I knew that it would be useless for me to try to change the gears because I still didn't really understand those. And so I began to squeeze on the brakes, both of them. And I squeezed harder and harder and harder. And I don't remember the exact moment of impact. But as nearly as we could figure, that either I skidded or simply didn't negotiate the curve at the bottom of the hill and managed to slam that bicycle into kind of a wooden fence-like barricade at the bottom of the hill, which pretty effectively stopped the bicycle. But it didn't stop me. And I went flying off of that bicycle and into the barricade. And I broke myself. I broke my collarbone, cracked the ribs, collapsed the lung, broke my elbow, broke my little finger, wound up with a couple of compression spinal fractures. But even then, I knew how lucky I was. I was alive. I was not paralyzed. I would heal. And I had on clean underwear. I spent about a week in a German hospital. We flew back to the United States. A couple of surgeries followed, and months of physical therapy. My husband and I bonded in new and totally unexpected ways because he had to cut out food for me. He had to button snap, zip to help me get in my clothes. He was my biggest cheerleader at the therapy sessions. He told everybody that his new job was driving Miss Donna. Now, when Christmas approached that year, now that the accident happened in August. As Christmas approached that year, I was still using every excuse I could find to stretch out on the couch on my heating pad. I was still wearing a back brace. I was still going to therapy sessions. But I got a gift that year that was truly inspired. Because my husband gave me that year for Christmas a bright and shiny burgundy colored 21-speed bicycle with handbrakes. And he said to me, he said, you know what your daddy always used to say? You gotta get back up on the horse that threw you. And so I have.